Lawrence Franklin. The purpose of this presentation will be to evaluate Lawrence Franklin's espionage activities as well as his trial. We'll also be analyzing his motives for spying and looking into possible psychological issues that he may have had. There was little information on Franklin's early life, but when interviewed pending his trial, his coworkers described him as a normal, highly ethical government employee, and they felt that they had no reason to believe he would commit espionage. He worked at the Defense Intelligence Agency before being transferred to the Pentagon Policy Office. There he was an analyst starting in 2001. He specialized in Iranian issues while he was working there. He was also a colonel in the Air Force Reserve and spent at least one tour of duty in Tel Aviv, which shows some of his early connections to Israel. He was accused of and admitted to passing documents to the press, as well as an Israeli diplomat, Noar Gillian, who he met with 8 times before he was caught. And he also passed information, like the documents themselves, to Stephen Rosen and Keith Weissman of the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee. The information that he gave was originally assumed to be about Middle Eastern countries' activities and weapons tests. Upon later investigation, it was revealed that the country in question was Iran. The documents that he gave were actually current and being debated for policy analysis at the time that he gave them, which gave Israel a major leg up on influencing policy decisions made by the US. AIPAC was a highly influential lobbying group at the time, and getting the documents was major in them being able to influence policy. The discovery of Franklin's activities strained relations with AIPAC and Israel. Israeli espionage with the US became hard to ignore, considering Jonathan Pollard's discovery in the 80s and now, including Lawrence Franklin's espionage activity. The documents given to AIPAC would give them a lot more ground when lobbying, as the documents were critical to Israel, as Israel had plans to launch preemptive strikes against Iran's nuclear installations. So information on their weapons and activities and the US's plans on how to deal with them would have been very critical. Relations with Israel were strained after Franklin's discovery, and it raised questions about how okay it was for an allied nation to steal US information, and if it was any worse or better than an enemy nation stealing information. Rosen and Weissman were both being monitored by the FBI since 1999 as part of a US investigation into Israeli espionage after Jonathan Pollard. This meant that the FBI was actually watching during several of their meetings with Franklin, so they really knew what was going on at the time. Despite the evidence against them collected by the FBI, it was actually very hard to convict them. They cited their First Amendment rights while in court and their ability to give information to the press freely. If it was found that First Amendment rights applied to outsiders taking information from government officials, it would mean that they would need to prove that Rosen and Weissman had intent to cause harm in giving the information. They were able to eventually convict them of conspiracy to disseminate the classified information that they stole. Franklin was not able to use the First Amendment to protect himself, as he's a government official with access to classified documents, which meant he was required to sign an agreement that he would safeguard those classified documents. So he was charged with conspiracy to disseminate secret information also, and withholding classified documents in his home. He pled guilty and agreed to cooperate with the investigation and find other people who were spying for Israel in exchange for a lesser charge. Franklin appeared to spy for ideological reasons. He stated that he was frustrated with U.S. policy and thought he could influence it through back channels to the National Security Council. He actually intended to get on the NSC as an Israeli agent, and it was apparent that AIPAC officials also wanted him to. He stated that he had no intention of harming the U.S. through his actions, which shows a divided loyalty that was common among spies since the 2000s. He also stated that he received more information that he gave, which suggests that he was trying to play down the impact that he had, which was also very common among spies who plead guilty to their espionage. Franklin is possibly narcissistic, but as there's not a lot of information on his early life, it is difficult to provide a diagnosis. He did feel like he had the power to directly influence U.S. policy through his spying, and that he would actually eventually get on the NSC. And he had a sense of importance to the Israeli cause, even though there was no evidence that he was a formal asset for them. In an interview with Franklin, I would ask him how his relationship with his wife was to get more of a sense of his family life, which would help a lot with determining his motivations. But I would also want to know why he chose Israel, as there seemed like there would be other nations that he could have worked with in order to achieve his ends of affecting policy. And I would want to know if Jonathan Pollard's actions had affected his decision to spy for Israel. Also knowing any other hidden motives that he might have had, other than affecting U.S. policy, that might have affected his decision to choose Israel. The number of sources for Franklin was slightly limited, with most of it consisting of news articles. It especially limited the analysis of his personal life. The information that I was able to find, however, corroborated well, so there wasn't really much question over what he actually did. That seemed fairly certain.